Right. Welcome, everyone. If you've not been to one of these presentations before, my name is Megan Rowe. I am the manager at St. Jude Wellness Center, and I'm a registered dietitian. This will probably be one of our faster webinars, although knowing me, sometimes I go off on tangents, so who knows. But I wanted to try and give kind of a quicker, truly lunch and learn so that you can then be on your way and just give you some really tangible information to be able to go to the grocery store. So we're going to talk about label reading today. And as soon as my slides go forward, there we go. It doesn't want to show you my picture. Well, I had a picture of a whole bunch of confusing labels, and that's why we're here, because labels are really confusing. I think it can be really, really difficult to navigate the grocery stores and the packages. What do the different numbers mean? What do the ingredients mean? So that's what we're going to go over today, and kind of hopefully you walk away at least with some good guidelines of what you should be looking for the next package that you pick up. So the first thing we need to know when looking at a label is, what are the numbers even based on? And they're based on serving size. So as you can see on these two label examples that I picked here, on the one on the left, the serving size is 5 crackers. The next one, the serving size is 1/2 cup dry. I believe that's a cereal. So just know the serving size does not mean that is the serving size you are supposed to eat. It does not mean that you have to eat 5 crackers and that you cannot eat 10. It does not mean that 1/2 cup is an appropriate portion size for you and your needs. All the portion size or the serving size means on a label is that is what all the numbers are based off of. So 80 calories on that cracker label is for 5 crackers. So if you eat 10 crackers, you need to know that you're eating 160 calories, and you need to multiply all the rest of those numbers underneath it. Okay, and maybe for you, maybe the cereal 1 cup is more of an appropriate number for you. Maybe you're looking at it and you're thinking, gosh, I need 10 grams of protein. Then just double that cup, but also know that you're doubling everything else. So just something to keep in mind on serving size. I think a lot of times people think that that is the recommended amount, and that's just the amount that the numbers are based on. It doesn't really mean anything other than that. It's also really important when we're looking at those numbers, because I think we tend to forget about that. And oh, wow, it's only an 80-calorie cracker serving, and it has almost no carbs, no nothing. Great. But then we eat the whole ream of the Ritz crackers, and now we have to multiply all those numbers, by 6, 7, 8. So just something to keep in mind. Also, up there, the DVs, the daily values, I just wanted to point out what that means, because sometimes people don't understand what the percentages mean. And that is based on the recommended dietary intake. So that is how much fat, carbs, protein, sodium, the general average American who is an adult should be eating. What percentage of that daily amount does that number mean? So if we're looking over on the left, total fat is 4.5 grams per serving. That's about 7% of your daily needs for total fat as an average adult. Again, that really doesn't apply to individual needs. That doesn't apply to kids. That doesn't apply to anyone who's slightly higher on the BMI or lower on the BMI, or athletic, or recovering from surgery. There's all these different needs that you might have. This is just that average number. Less than 5% is very, very little. Over 15% is considered a lot. I don't really look at the percentages ever, because they don't really apply to most people that I talk to. Most of us have a specific need, and the percentages don't really matter all that much, but that's what they mean. And then the calories. Calories are a tricky thing as well, because they don't tell us a lot of information either. And this is one of my favorite pictures. This is 188 calories of almonds, and this is 188 calories of sweet tart candies. Will that 188 calories do the same thing in your body, whether they're coming from almonds or from these sweet jujube things? They will not. You are getting very different protein and fat and carbohydrate and fiber breakdown and sugar breakdown, and you're going to have a very different response in your body from the 188 calories on the left versus the 188 calories on the right. So when we get into the habit of only looking at calories on a label, we can tend to not be looking at the whole big picture. I tend to skip right over calories as well. I don't really ever look, because it doesn't really matter to me. First of all, the calories don't do the same thing depending on where those calories are coming from. But also, most of us aren't eating this one item by itself. We might be buying crackers with cheese. We might be buying these almonds to also eat with a banana. So the total calories in that one serving of that one product isn't really giving you a good idea of what you're eating for the day. So all that to say, that's what the numbers mean, but none of these really matter all that much to me. So let's look at what does kind of matter is your macronutrients. So macronutrients, if you're unfamiliar with that term, or macros, you may have heard of macro counting. Macronutrients are fat, carbohydrate, and protein. There are only 3 macros, and they're called macronutrients because these are the 3 categories of nutrients that give us energy. Versus micronutrients, these are our vitamins and minerals. Vitamin A, biotin, zinc, vitamin D. These are micros because they give us really important stuff, but they don't give us energy. We can't produce ATP from micronutrients. So that's just giving you that background and what that means. Those are the most important things to look for in a label are your macros in general. That means how much of that calorie count that it's showing you comes from fat versus protein versus carbohydrate. So let's look first at the fat, since that's labeled first on a label. Total fat. Everyone always wants to know, what is the total fat I should be looking for in a label? What's the number I should be looking for? And honestly, I can't tell you because it really depends on your very own unique eating plan. Are you eating low carb, higher fat? Are you eating moderate fat? Are you on a medication that requires you to have very, very low fat? Everyone is so incredibly different in their fat intake needs that it's very hard to tell you what a good number is. Also, it depends on what food you're looking at. If we're buying a hamburger, that is automatically going to be higher in fat than, let's say, a cracker. That doesn't mean the cracker is healthier than the hamburger meat. It just has less fat because of the nature of what type of food it is. So something to keep in mind in general is your total fat intake is 20 to 35% of your daily calories. That's a good range. So if you're really wanting to break down numbers, you can come up with what's your total daily calorie need? What's 20 to 35% of that? And that's the amount of calories I need from fat every single day. So then I can break that up into maybe 3 meals a day or 3 meals and 2 snacks, however you eat, and kind of divvy that up further to give yourself a good idea of what you should be getting for fat. But that's on a label hard to break down. So it's easier to look at the types of fats. Those give us some better guidelines. Saturated fat should be less than 3 grams in processed food. And I say that specifically again because of those of us who maybe eat meat. Something that's maybe just ground meat, for instance. Ground meat is always going to have more saturated fat than 3 because it inherently has saturated fat by the nature of it being an animal product. That doesn't mean that that food is bad for you. It's just a higher saturated fat food. But when we're looking at processed foods like granola bars and crackers and pre-made, ready-made meals, in general, those are going to have added fat, not natural sources of fat. So we want those to be less than 3 grams whenever possible. And there's wiggle room here, right? If you had a really low fat lunch and you have 3.5 to 4 grams per serving of saturated fat at dinner, you're going to be okay. But that's in general your guideline. Trans fat should always be 0. There's not a lot of wiggle room here. I put a little asterisk there. So first of all, trans fats are a created fat. They don't occur naturally. What happens is they actually the people in the labs take unsaturated fats and they chemically alter them to be now this man-made saturated fat that is very, very shelf stable. So it's great for processed food, but because it's not a naturally occurring fat, our body doesn't know what to do with it. And study after study after study shows that trans fat creates inflammation and heart disease. So we want 0. There's an asterisk there because there are some label reading loopholes, you might say, that if there is a very small certain amount of some trans fats in a product, they can say 0 as long as it's below a threshold. So you want to fast forward over to the ingredient list and look for the word hydrogenated. And that is written there underneath the ingredients. Avoid hydrogenated oils. If you see the word hydrogenated in the ingredient list, you can guarantee you have trace amounts of trans fat in that product per serving. So something, let's say, and I don't mean to harp on Ritz crackers, but it's easy to visualize. So let's say Ritz crackers has a 0 trans fat on the label, but you see hydrogenated in the ingredient list and you eat the entire ream, of the Ritz cracker, as most of us do, instead of just 5, you're likely getting 1, maybe even 2 grams of trans fats there. So it's important to look for that word hydrogenated, even if it says 0 trans fats. Poly and mono unsaturated fats, these are our good unsaturated fats. These are good for us. There's 2 different kinds. Basically, what you're looking for, instead of a number guideline, you want to see more mono than poly for the most part. Okay, again, there's always going to be caveats and odd things there. But in a processed food, we want more mono than poly. Okay, so here on this list, it says 7 grams mono, 1 gram poly, 0 grams trans fats, 3.5 grams saturated, which is barely over the threshold. So in the fat category, the label we're looking at is not too terrible. Under ingredients, so the other thing to think about is, aside from the numbers, where are those numbers coming from? What type of saturated fat are those 3.5 grams? What type of polyunsaturated fat is that 1 gram? Those are things that are also really important, because if they're chemically made, if they're artificial, if they're an inflammatory substance, I don't really care if the number looks good. It's not a good ingredient to begin with. So typically I look actually more at ingredients than I do actual numbers. So when it comes to fat, we're avoiding the word hydrogenated. We are minimizing omega-6 oils. These are our polys, and that means sunflower oil, safflower oil, corn oil, canola oil, peanut, vegetable, soybean, and palm. All of these are very, very common to find in processed food, and they're very inflammatory. In the United States, our ratio of omega-3s to 6s, it's supposed to be more like, I forget the actual ratio. I think it's supposed to be something like 4 to 1. I think it is 4 to 1. In the United States, most of us eat 40 to 1. So we're eating tons of omega-6s because we're eating all of these processed foods that have these oils in them. Okay. So your question to yourself is, where's my fat coming from? And is this supposed to be a food that has added fat anyway? So my question for that would be something like a peanut butter. Peanuts already have fat built in. They're made of fat. And so if we grind them up into a peanut butter, there's no need to add more oil to it. So if we're looking at the ingredient list and it says peanuts and peanut oil, well, why? Why did you add more fat to my already fatty food? So that's why I said, is it supposed to be a fat added food? Can you find a food that's similar to it without the added fat, because it's not necessary? So let's take our label here as an example. We already looked at the numbers. Where is our fat coming from? I underline them in red. Our fat is coming from roasted peanuts. Good. That's a real food. I recognize that. It's coming from vegetable oils, palm kernel, canola, and peanut oil. Ooh, omega-6s right there. So I liked the amount of numbers of unsaturated fats, but I do not like where they are coming from. Those are inflammatory oils. It's also coming from peanut butter, which is just peanuts and salt. So I'm not worried about the peanuts. I am worried about the oil there. Okay, so let's move on to carbohydrates. That's we're going to skip over cholesterol and sodium. Don't worry, I'll come back to them. But for now, we're just looking at our macros. Carbohydrates, total carbohydrate, again, I can't tell you exactly how much you should be looking for because it depends on how you eat. Are you a high carb eater right now because you're an athlete that's getting ready for an event? Maybe. Are you low carb because you're keto or you're following a really strict diabetic plan? So in general, your per meal should be 15 grams of carb, and your per snack should be 15 grams of carb, and your per meal should be 30 to 45. General, very general guidelines. So keep that in mind when you're reading labels. Is this protein bar going to be a snack? Is it going to be your full meal? Are you going to eat it alongside something else that may also have carbohydrates in it? I don't know. But if this was going to be our one snack and we're only looking at carbs, 15 grams, good, it meets that need. But then underneath carbohydrates, it'll tell you 2 things. How much of those carbs are fiber carbs and how much of those carbs are sugar carbs, because they're 2 types of carbs and they do 2 very different things. So in our fiber category, we want that to be 3 or more. And I put in italics there for grain or plant foods, because foods, let's say like yogurt, are not natural sources of fiber. So it doesn't mean that that is an unhealthy food, but you won't find more than 3 grams of fiber in a yogurt or a cottage cheese, for instance. So you want more than 3 grams per serving. That's a good number to look for on your fiber. Per day, you want 25 to 35. So that can also help you when you're looking at numbers. Total sugar should be less than 10, ideally less than 7. But again, there are some foods like a yogurt that has a natural source of sugar that might be 10 instead. The really key line is the added sugar that not all foods will give to you, but most of them are these days. Your added sugar should always be less than 4 grams. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, because that is blatantly added sugar thrown into that food. It's not a natural, oh, is it the lactose that's naturally there in the yogurt? It's added. We don't want more than 4 grams, okay? So again, my numbers look okay, let's say. This particular food item, it's 15 grams of carb. That's a snack. It's high fiber. It's more than 3. It's meeting my less than 10 guideline. It's got 5 grams of added sugar, so not loving that, but it's just barely there. And the fat looked okay, so maybe it's fine. Maybe it's one of those sometimes foods. Where are the carbs coming from? Is there sugar in the top 3 foods listed in the ingredient list? Are there more than one type of sugar listed? Is there anything artificial as far as sugars? And is it supposed to be an added sugar food to begin with? Again, take yogurt, for instance. Do you need to add sugar to yogurt? No, you could add your own. Things like sauces and dressings, these are the ones that are oftentimes the most surprising to people because it's not even a sweet food to begin with. And then they turn it over and they're like, what? There's 5 grams of added sugar in my salad dressing? So it's something to just keep in mind. So in our protein bar here, we are looking for our carbohydrates. So we have chicory root extract. Believe it or not, that is a carbohydrate. That is your fiber. That is why that is so high fiber, because they basically put fiber powder in there. They kind of put Metamucil in your protein bar, more or less. That's what chicory powder is. So it's not bad, but that's where it's coming from. Semi-sweet chocolate chips made of sugar, chocolate liqueur, cocoa butter, soy lecithin, and natural flavor. So we've got sweetened chocolate chips as item number 3. Or no, it's item number 4. So we're just made it out of that number 3. We also have sugar and corn syrup and fructose and vegetable glycerin. These are all added forms of sugar. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 types of sugar that are all added. And then we have some starches that bind it together. It's not necessarily sugar, but it's empty carbohydrate with no fiber at all. So that's your rice starch and your corn starch. That's a lot of types of empty, no fiber, very, very processed and refined sugars in our protein bar snack, despite the fact that the numbers didn't look too bad. Okay, this is why the ingredients are so important. And then we have protein. That's our third macronutrient. Just like the others, I cannot tell you what the right amount of protein is for you and for this food. But in general, for your snacks should be 10 to 15 grams of protein, and your meals should be about 30. Or if you want to think of your total daily needs, 10 to 35% of that should be protein. So knowing all of that, you can kind of break down in general, is this a protein food for me? When I'm buying these bars, because they're going to be a snack for me, how much protein should I be looking for? So if this is going to be a snack, it's on the low end of a good protein snack, but it's there. It's within that range. Kind of interesting given that they are promoting this as a Nature Valley protein bar, that's what this is being promoted as protein, and it's on the low end of a protein snack, but so those are the kind of things that in my mind kind of red flag to me of, what exactly is going on here? And then again, ask yourself, where is the protein coming from? Where are those 10 grams? What's the source? And then how will you be eating this food? Are you eating it alongside more protein? This is really important for ingredients that are going into a meal. Like if you're looking at a burger or a meatball that you're going to be eating with other stuff, if that item is supposed to be your protein source and it only has 10 grams, where's the rest of your protein to make up that 30 grams of the meal? But let's look at where the protein is coming from. I found soy protein isolate, so soy protein powder, and whey protein isolate, so whey protein powder. So 2 different types of protein, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with either one of these sources of protein, but they are protein powders. So it's just something to keep in mind, because a lot of times people will tell me, I don't want to just rely only on powders, and they buy bars, which are basically just powders mixed with some nuts and sugar. So in general, it'd be interesting to think about, now that you're breaking all these down, is this a good choice for you? But let's look at the rest of the numbers. I promised I would come back to cholesterol and sodium. Cholesterol does not matter. That's all I have to say. Cholesterol. The research showed a decade ago that cholesterol from food does not contribute to our bodily cholesterol because our bodies will produce cholesterol whether we eat it or not. We have this whole process of producing it to cover up inflammation. It's a protective source. By covering it up, it can create blockages in our arteries. So there's a downside to it, but it doesn't matter how much we eat. Our body will produce it whether we eat it or not. And they've done studies with shrimp and these high cholesterol foods, and it doesn't increase your body's cholesterol. So it doesn't really matter. Just skip over it. I don't even know why it's still listed on labels. Sodium. In general, the American Heart Association recommends less than 2,300 milligrams for your entire day. So again, divvy that up. Think of your entire day and how many times per day you eat, and that will give you, in general, what you should be looking for sodium per meal, because it's really going to vary how are you eating this food? It might be higher sodium, but if that's one of the higher sodium foods for your day, it's okay. Just, pay attention to that. And then the micronutrients down at the very bottom, those will differ based on the food you're looking at. But essentially, it's what nutrients are you trying to eat more or less of? Let's say there's a bone condition you're worried about and you want to make sure you're getting lots of vitamin D and magnesium. Well, this food isn't a source of vitamin D at all. Doesn't mean you can't eat it. Not that every food that you're looking for has to be a source of vitamin D, but it's just kind of something to keep in mind. Usually I find this section is the most helpful for people who are trying to limit something, like someone with kidney disease, for instance, who really has to keep potassium and phosphorus down. These areas are helpful to be able to make sure you're not buying a really high potassium food. Outside of that, it doesn't really matter. But that's what we're looking for. So let's do a comparison. This whole presentation, we've been looking at Nature Valley protein bar. Let's look at another protein bar and just break it down based on what you know now. So these are two separate protein bars. I do not necessarily love or hate either one of them. I just kind of chose them because there's some stark differences. So we're looking at, first of all, serving size. What are the numbers based off of? They're both based on one bar. Okay, good to know. I get to eat an entire bar to just base these numbers off of. I'm skipping over calories because they don't really matter all that much. Total fat is actually the same for each one, and saturated fat is 3 versus 3.5. Okay. Trans fat is 0 for each one. Cholesterol, we don't care about. Sodium, just for comparison's sake, 135 versus 160. In the long run, that's not a huge difference. Our carb differences, 10 versus 15. So for someone, let's say, that's eating a keto diet, that might make a difference, but 10 versus 15 isn't huge. Fiber, we've got 6 grams in our Nature Valley bar and 8 in the IQ bar to the right. So that's a pretty significant difference when it comes to fiber. So the IQ bar definitely gets some points for fiber. Sugars, 7 versus 1. Interesting. And 5 grams of sugar in the protein in the Nature Valley and 0 added sugar in the IQ bar. So that's very interesting to me. That's also making me think, how does the IQ bar taste like chocolate if we don't have any added sugar? So note to self, read the ingredient list. But I'm going to finish off my numbers here. Protein is 10 and 12. The IQ bar has slightly more protein, but essentially neither one of them are huge protein contributors. They're both good protein snacks with fairly low carbs. The biggest thing to me as far as numbers go and the difference here is that sugar and the fiber. So let's look at where all those things are coming from in the IQ bar. I've got almonds as a protein and a fat source. Good. Protein blend. So they're using pea protein powder in this one. So again, it's just a bar. So it's protein powder blended up. Natural flavors, which typically there's a proprietary blend around that. Natural flavors isn't going to mean sugar or anything that's hidden there. A prebiotic blend, so that's where all the fiber is coming from. So they're using essentially a more natural source of fiber powder. Cocoa, which isn't good, cocoa powder. Coconut oil, so that's where we're getting some of that fat, but it must not be very much if it's only 3 grams saturated. Unsweetened chocolate, water, cocoa butter, sea salt. Lion's mane is a type of mushroom powder, so they're probably also promoting the fact that this is good for your brain, probably why it's IQ bar. And stevia, there it is. So that is why this can taste like a chocolate bar and have 0 added sugars. It's using stevia. I have nothing against stevia. There's nothing wrong with it. It is not artificial, but there are some people who can detect the taste of stevia. They don't like it. So it's something to keep in mind. Maybe this bar is not the right one for you. So I'm just curious for you to say to yourself, which bar would you choose if you had to buy yourself a snack bar? And these were the only two on the shelves for your own purposes. And I can tell you, I would probably choose the one on the right, not because it's world's healthiest, but if I had to have a snack, I'm on a road trip, I stop at 7-Eleven, and these are my two options, I'm going to go with the one on the right simply because the breakdown is pretty much the same. I have better sugar and protein in the one on the right, and the ingredients are all coming from recognizable items that are more or less good for my body. Okay, so let's look at label claims here. Something to be aware of is food labels are billboards. Remind yourself of that. Every time you go into a grocery store or anywhere selling food, is all that food product wants to do is sell you their item. They are not trying to be your best friend or be your doctor or make your health better. So every time you're looking at the front of a label, it is a billboard. There is millions of dollars of marketing that goes into that label. So for instance, just looking at these two Jif peanut butters, notice a color difference. Notice that the one on the right, the reduced fat Jif, is very green because green is an indicator of health in the eyes of humans. We see green and we think go, we think yes, we think healthy, versus red versus yellow versus orange tend to be indicators of hunger, sometimes bad, sometimes stop. So it's just interesting to think about. There's coloring, there's font marketing. So you can't look at the front is what I'm saying. And so you have your regular Jif and your reduced fat. And I think typically we might just reach for the reduced fat thinking, well, this is better for me. We're always going to flip it over now that we know what we're looking for. And we're going to do a comparison. So what's interesting here is our reduced fat peanut butter has exactly the same calories as our regular Jif peanut butter. So the calories are not changing at all, which is really interesting. So it makes me wonder, what did they put in when they took out fat? Because there is a fat difference. They said it was reduced fat. They're not allowed to put that on there unless it is indeed reduced fat. So there is a 4-gram difference in total fat content. That's 4% difference. And if you're eating this peanut butter item every single day, that will definitely make a calorie difference and a fat difference. If it's once in a while, 4 grams isn't really that big of a deal. But if they took 4 grams out of fat and the calories are the same, they must have put something else back in. So we look down, down, down. Sodium, woo, a whole 100 milligrams higher in the reduced fat. The carbohydrate is pretty significantly higher, 7 versus 15, and there's an extra gram of sugar. So they took out the fat, they realized it didn't taste as good, and so they added more salt and more sugar to the reduced fat. So that's your swap. You get less fat, but you get more sugar and salt. So again, maybe that is the swap that you need for your health, but it's very, very important that you do that due diligence of reading it and decide, is that the swap worth making? Maybe you could find a totally different peanut butter altogether that meets your better needs. And I wanted to touch on other types of claims you might see on labels aside from the nutrition facts, just since we're talking about labels. Things that say grass-fed or pasture-raised are very, very good indicators of the health of that food. I wish they were slightly more tightly regulated, but they're pretty well regulated in the United States. And what it means is the animal itself was out at pasture, whether that's a chicken or a goat or a pig or a cow or a bison. They're eating the grasses and the dirt and the seeds and the bugs that their bodies are supposed to. They're roaming around in the sun versus factory farmed animals that are very crowded together, eating essentially very processed food. What we see is the meat and the eggs and the milk products from all of these animals are better sources of your micronutrients, and they tend to be lower in saturated fat than the other kind. So when you can look for animal products that say pasture raised, grass fed, these are good labels that you can rely on. And as far as fats go, look for the word cold pressed. That's another good label to look for. It means it's a healthier version of that oil. So what's our order of operations? We walk into the store, we have maybe we're looking for a cereal, and there's a whole aisle dedicated to cereals. What am I supposed to look for on these labels? So first of all, maybe you do a little bit of sleuthing and just look at the coloring and where on the shelf those things are. If they're really low, they're intended for children. If they're really high and out of reach, they're probably healthier and they probably taste a little less sugary. So sometimes you can just know the differences there. If you're reaching for something up higher, it's probably not as sugary, sugar bomb. But when you grab your two items, I'm going to grab both of these boxes of cereal. What am I going to look for first? First of all, I want you to visualize your expectations before you even look at the numbers. What is this product supposed to be? What's it supposed to be made out of? If you were to pick up this cereal or this soup, what would you expect it to say? What should be in the ingredients, right? If you were going to make this food at home, which you're not because you're buying it pre-made, which is fine. Let's say you grabbed a soup, what might you put into it so that you know ahead of time what you're expecting to see so that hopefully that ingredient list matches your expectations. What do you expect to see in terms of numbers? Is this supposed to be a fatty food? Is it supposed to be a sweet tasting food? Do I expect to see something in the sugar category or not? Those are things to think about ahead of time so that hopefully the numbers either shock you and you think, whoa, this has sugar and it's not supposed to, and you put it back. How do you plan to eat this item? Are you eating it on its own? Will you be combining it? Is it a snack versus a meal? This is going to help you with looking at numbers. So once we've done that visualization, you check your serving size for reference. Ask yourself, is that a realistic portion for you? Are you going to eat just 5 of these crackers when you sit down, or are you going to eat 15? And if you're going to eat 15, then you need to multiply that number that you see all the way down by 3 if the serving size is 5, right? So just make sure you're reading the numbers correctly for how you're going to eat it. Fats, carbs, sugar, or fiber, sugar, and protein. These are our macro areas. How do these numbers align with your personal goals? If you are eating low carb, high fiber, does it meet your needs? If you are eating higher carb, does it meet your needs? And then check the ingredients. How does the list compare to your own expectation? Where are those macros coming from? Are they real foods you could potentially cook yourself? Are they recognizable? Are they not recognizable? Or are they just chock full of, sugars and omega-6 oils? These are all things to think about, which is a lot, especially if you're not used to label reading. So my recommendation when people are first kind of starting out is pick 1 or 2 things that you're going to do some sleuthing on. If you got to buy cereal this week, spend some time in the cereal aisle and don't worry about the crackers and don't worry about the yogurt. Worry about that in your next round so that you're not spending 5 hours at the grocery store. But kind of each time you do some of that detective work, you'll know more and more that next time that you can just grab those items that you did spend time looking at. So I'm going to actually just wrap us up here with another label that I want you to think through. So kind of think through this with me. We have, first of all, what's the name of this product? Smart Start Healthy Heart. What are they trying to sell me here? They are telling me this is a healthy food for my heart. They want me to buy it because it's good for me. All right, I have a heart condition. This sounds good to me. What do I need knowing I have a heart condition? I probably need pretty minimal saturated fat. I probably need a whole lot of fiber, and I should be watching my sugar intake. Those are kind of my personal needs as I'm going through this. Okay, so my serving size, 1 1/4 cup. This is a cereal, by the way. 1 1/4 cup seems fair. I'm going to go with that. We're going to skip over calories. We're going to look at total fat. I don't really know because I forgot to calculate my totals, but saturated fat, that should be less than 3, right? 0.5. Cool. Awesome. Trans fat should always be 0. I see 0. Megan told me to check ingredients. I'm going to just do a quick skim of where the fat is coming from. Not the oat bran, not the rice, not the sugar. Partially hydrogenated soybean oil. Hydrogenated means trans fat. So if I'm eating this every single day, I'm getting trace amounts of trans fats every single day, which are terrible for my heart. Interesting. Cholesterol, we don't care about. Sodium, 140, that's pretty low for a cereal. Potassium, this would only be if this really mattered for you. It's interesting that's even listed there. Total carbohydrate, 46 grams. That's on the high end for a meal, but maybe it's all fiber. Let's see. Dietary fibers, 5. We want it to be more than 3. So All right, it's there. That's not super high considering how high the carbs are, but it is higher than 3. Sugars, 17. Don't we want that to be less than 10? Yikes. And this is interesting because this is an old label, so it doesn't say added sugars, it just says other carbs. So if it's not fiber and it's not natural sugar, that must mean added sugar carbs, 24 grams. So we want that to be less than 4. So where's this all coming from? Oat bran, rice. So the oat bran has some fiber in it. Rice is empty starch. Sugar. So in the top 3, I've already got my first sugar. Oat clusters made of more sugar, and oats are made of sugar and high fructose corn syrup. And there's that hydrogenated oil and molasses and honey. I think we're at like 6 sugars already. Wheat flakes, so that's not bad. That's probably where some of the fiber is coming from. Crisp rice made of rice sugar, malt, and salt. More corn syrup. Polydextrose is another type of sugar. Honey sugar. Cinnamon, and then we've got some flavorings, a high fructose corn syrup again, more flavorings, and basically some vitamins and minerals. I'm wondering how healthy this truly could be for my heart. I'm wondering if I can find a better cereal. So hopefully that kind of took you through where my brain looks when I'm looking at labels and can help you decide, is this truly what's being marketed to me for? So that wraps us up. I told you it would be a short one today. I wanted to just give you some tangibles. So let me pull up the chat because we do have time for questions. Okay. Feel free to type any questions you have into the chat box. Yes, labels are deceiving. Which oils are okay to cook or bake with? My preference for you to have would be to have anywhere from 1 to 3 oils in your house. Pretty much that's all you need. When it comes to cooking, you want either avocado oil, olive oil, or coconut oil. Those 3 oils are okay with heat. They do well with heat. Avocado oil and coconut oil do the best with heat. You can cook pretty high heat with those. Olive oil is sort of like a moderate heat. So if you're doing a light saute or something, it's fine. But if you're doing like a really high heat stir fry, you might want to lean more on the avocado or the coconut. Sesame, as long as it's cold pressed. So I guess 4 oils. But avoiding all of those vegetable oils that we also wanted to avoid on a list. Yes, I agree. The IQ bar. And again, I don't have any affiliation with IQ, by the way. And there's other great bars out there. I just sort of picked that one because it was a good picture. Yes, you will have access to this recording. Sorry, I didn't see that earlier, but yes, everyone who's registered, and it will be posted on the site. Oh goodness, what are your thoughts on Bobby approved? That's a good question. I like Bobby Parrish, I believe is his full name. He's like a nutrition influencer. He has a lot of good information. He really, really does. And what I like is he gives lots of good alternatives, good recipe ideas. His product line is pretty darn good. The ingredients are great. What I don't like is he's pretty extremist, and he tends to be an all or nothing in his messaging. Like, if you ever eat canola oil, you're going to be inflamed. And that's not the way the body works. We have a lot more wiggle room with balance. It's majority of the time trying to eat the way that I teach and that he teaches. And his products tend to be kind of pricey, but again, they are good quality products, and pretty much for the most part, I don't disagree with him. I just think that it's a little too all or nothing in the messaging. You're welcome. What would be the best oil to pop popcorn? So actually any of those that I mentioned, my favorite, because popcorn does get pretty hot, would be avocado oil or coconut oil. Either one. You could also do like a ghee, a grass-fed ghee, if you wanted kind of the buttery taste for your popcorn. That would be a good option. Hey, everyone. All right, let me end my record and I'll come back just to make sure everybody has time to add their questions. So thank you for joining. I'm going to end record here.